All right, so you guys have sent in a huge stack of articles all about Mark Carney becoming Canada's new prime minister.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild stuff going on up north right now. So
Yeah?
we're going to deep dive into it all today, figure out what it all means for Canada.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, so Justin Trudeau stepped down. Carney won a landslide victory to lead the Liberal Party.
Huge.
And now he's about to be prime minister, but there's a catch.
Oh.
He's inheriting this trade war with the U.S., a very fragile Canadian economy, and he needs to call an election basically right away.
Wow.
Because you can't even sit in the parliament without winning a seat.
Right, right.
So talk about jumping in the deep end, right?
Yeah, it's really a remarkable turn of events. And, it begs the question, who is Mark Carney and is he up to this challenge?
Right, and the articles you sent paint this pretty impressive picture.
Yeah, for sure.
Harvard, Oxford, 13 years at Goldman Sachs.
Yeah.
He even ran the Bank of England.
Wow.
Which is a big deal because he was the first non-Brit to do that in over 300 years.
That's wild. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating. And his background isn't just impressive. It's directly relevant to the challenges that Canada's facing right now.
Oh, okay. Interesting. How so?
He's not just a financial expert.
Yeah.
He's a crisis manager.
I see.
He led the Bank of Canada through the 2008 financial crisis. Remember that?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And then he went on to head the Bank of England during, all that uncertainty with Brexit.
Right.
So he definitely has the economic expertise. But the question is, can he handle the political side of it all?
Right. Being prime minister's got to be a lot different than leading a central bank.
Right. It's way more than just numbers and spreadsheets.
Totally. And speaking of pressure, we got to talk about this trade war with the U.S.
Yeah.
Trump put a 25% tariff on Canadian goods that has to hurt, right?
Yeah, it's a major blow.
And then the whole annexation thing going on.
I know.
I mean, it seems almost surreal.
It really does.
Can you help us understand what's going on there?
Yeah. Well, those tariffs are a huge hit to the Canadian economy. And the annexation threats, while unlikely to be actually carried out, they're really creating this climate of fear and uncertainty.
Right.
It's important to understand that this trade war isn't just some political squabble.
Right.
It has real-world consequences for everyday Canadians.
For sure.
Those tariffs drive up the cost of goods, and the uncertainty makes businesses hesitant to invest.
I see.
So for your listeners, this means that economic anxiety that a lot of Canadians were already feeling before Carney even came on the scene,
Yeah.
it's only going to get worse.
So how did we even get here? I thought Trudeau had been in power for a while.
Yeah, he was. But his sunny ways approach, while initially popular, led to a decline in his popularity over time for a number of factors.
Okay, so what happened?
Soaring housing costs, increasing strain on the healthcare system, a general sense of economic unease.
I see.
This created an opening for someone like Carney,
Right.
someone seen as a steady hand who could navigate, these difficult waters.
Right. But if Trudeau was just losing popularity, wouldn't the Conservatives have been the obvious choice to replace him?
Well, that's where things get interesting.
Oh, really?
It seems like the trade war, and especially those annexation threats, they actually galvanize support for the Liberals.
Wow. So Trump may have actually helped the Liberals by creating this sense of urgency and fear.
It's certainly a possibility.
Huh.
And remember, Carney has been pretty vocal criticizing Trump. He even called out his plan to divide and conquer.
Oh, wow.
And this really resonates with Canadians who are worried about their country being bullied by a more powerful neighbor.
Right.
They see Carney as someone who won't back down, someone who will fight for Canada's interests on the world stage.
Right. So that's a pretty stark contrast to his main rival, the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's their dynamic like?
Well, Poilievre is trying to paint Carney as this out-of-touch elitist.
I see.
Someone who got rich off of the global financial system while everyday Canadians struggled.
Right.
But Carney has countered by framing Poilievre as a Trump acolyte.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Someone who would weaken Canada's position in the world and, put the country's interests at risk.
So it sounds like we've got this clash of personalities, clash of ideologies, and a lot at stake for Canada's future.
Absolutely.
This election is going to be one for the history books, it sounds like.
Yeah.
But before we dive into the election itself, let's talk about Carney's game plan. What's he promising if he wins?
One of the most interesting things Carney's done is signal a potential shift in economic policy.
Oh, how so?
He promised to get rid of the carbon tax, which is a key part of Trudeau's environmental agenda.
Right.
And he's also vowed to reverse that capital gains tax hike.
Wow.
These moves suggest he's trying to appeal to voters who are feeling the economic pinch and who might be skeptical of the Liberals' traditional focus on, social programs and environmental policies.
Right.
It's pretty bold for someone who's never held elected office before.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if his lack of political experience will help him or hurt him. Do you think he can navigate this whole world of Canadian politics and actually deliver on these promises?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
On the one hand, he's a fresh face.
Yeah.
Right. He doesn't have the baggage that comes with a long political career.
I see.
So he could present himself as an outsider, someone who's not part of the establishment that a lot of Canadians are disillusioned with right now.
Totally. But governing's a lot different than making promises on the campaign trail.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
He's going to have to build alliances, make compromises, convince a skeptical parliament to get behind his agenda.
Right.
So he's got his work cut out for him.
He does.
And speaking of work, this election is coming up fast.
Yeah.
Can you give us a quick rundown of the timeline and what to expect?
Sure. So Carney has to call an election as soon as possible.
Right.
Because remember, he can't even go into Parliament without a seat.
Right.
And the latest whispers suggest that he'll probably call the election for either April 28th or May 5th.
Wow, that's coming up quick.
Yeah, so we're talking about a campaign that's basically starting now.
And with so much at stake, every move he makes from now until Election Day is going to be scrutinized.
Absolutely.
It's going to be fascinating to watch how he handles the pressure.
Yeah.
But before we get into all the details of the election campaign, let's take a closer look at Carney's vision for Canada's future and how he plans to handle these huge challenges.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, so we've got this high-stakes election coming up, and it sounds like it's going to be a real battle of ideas.
Yeah, it really is. You've got these two very different narratives competing for the hearts and minds of Canadian voters.
Right. You mentioned earlier that there's this clash of personalities and ideologies between Carney and Poilievre.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that a little bit for us? What are the key differences in their visions for Canada?
Well, at the heart of it, you have Carney, the pragmatic economist.
Right.
He's offering a vision of steady, experienced leadership through challenging times. He's really emphasizing his ability to navigate complex economic issues and stand up for Canada's interests on the world stage, especially with all the pressure from the U.S.
Right.
He's framing this election as a choice between stability and uncertainty, competence and risk.
So what about Poilievre? What's his counter-narrative?
Poilievre is tapping into a different kind of energy. It's a populist energy that we've seen in other countries as well.
Yeah.
He's appealing to those who feel left behind by the current system, people who feel like the government isn't working for them.
I see.
He's promising change, a break from the status quo, a return to what he sees as traditional Canadian values.
It sounds like a classic us versus them dynamic.
Exactly.
With Carney representing the elite establishment and Poilievre positioning himself as the champion of the everyday Canadian.
Right, and this dynamic plays out in their rhetoric, too.
Oh, how so?
Remember Carney's dark days comment?
Yeah, where he warned about the threat from Trump.
Exactly. He was warning about the potential consequences for Canada if they don't choose the right leader. That was a very deliberate attempt to frame the election in stark terms,
Okay.
to present himself as the only one who can protect Canada from this dangerous external threat.
But isn't Poilievre right when he says that Carney was part of the system that created a lot of the problems Canadians are facing now?
What?
I mean, he was advising Trudeau on economic policy and things like housing affordability and healthcare access. They haven't gotten any better.
Yeah, that's a good point. Poilievre is definitely trying to exploit that angle.
Right.
And it's a potent line of attack.
Yeah.
He's trying to tie Carney to the perceived failures of the Liberal government, to paint him as out of touch with the everyday struggles of Canadians. He's saying, look, this guy was part of the problem, and now he's promising to be the solution. Don't fall for it.
So how effective do you think that attack will be? Can Carney really distance himself from the Trudeau era and convince voters that he represents a real change?
Well, that's going to be a key challenge for him.
Yeah.
He has to acknowledge the very real problems Canadians are facing. And he has to offer concrete solutions.
Right.
Solutions that go beyond just vague promises of better economic management.
Sure.
He needs to connect with voters on an emotional level, not just an intellectual one.
Right.
He has to show that he understands their anxieties, their frustrations, their hopes for the future.
So it's not just about the numbers, it's about the story, the narrative that each candidate is able to tell about Canada's future.
Precisely. Whoever can convince Canadians that they have the right vision, the right plan, and the right leadership to guide the country through these turbulent times, that's who's likely to win.
Okay, so we've talked about the big picture, the
Really?
clash of ideologies, the different narratives being put forward.
Yeah.
Now let's get down to the nitty-gritty. What are Carney's actual chances of winning this election?
Right.
He's a political newbie going up against a seasoned veteran like Poilievre. Is that a major disadvantage?
Yeah, definitely something to consider. Poilievre knows how to play the political game. He's got a well-established base of support, and he's a very skilled communicator.
Right.
But Carney's landslide victory in the Liberal leadership race, it suggests that he's got strong support within the party.
Okay.
And the fact that he resonated with voters across all 343 Liberal districts,
wow,
that's really significant. It shows that he has the potential to appeal to a wide range of Canadians.
So he's got the party behind him, but what about the broader electorate?
Yeah.
What are the key factors that are going to determine whether he wins or loses?
Well, there are a few things to watch for.
Okay.
First, how effectively can Carney capitalize on that rally around the flag effect we talked about?
Right.
Can he continue to frame the election as a choice between standing up to Trump and protecting Canada's interests?
I see.
Or will Poilievre be able to shift the focus to domestic issues like the economy and healthcare?
That makes sense. If voters are mostly concerned about their wallets and access to essential services, they might not be so receptive to Carney's message about standing up to Trump.
Exactly. And that leads to the second key factor.
Okay.
Can Carney convince voters that he has concrete solutions to these domestic challenges?
Right.
Poilievre is hammering away at the rising cost of living, the strain on the healthcare system, and this perception that the Liberals are out of touch with the needs of everyday Canadians.
Right.
Carney needs to offer more than just vague promises and economic jargon.
Sure.
He needs to show that he understands the struggles people are facing and that he has a plan to make things better.
So it's a balancing act. He needs to project strength and confidence on the world stage, but also show empathy and understanding on the domestic front.
Exactly. And that's where his lack of political experience could be a double-edged sword.
Right. How so?
On one hand, he can present himself as an outsider, someone who's not beholden to special interests, and who will bring a fresh perspective to government. But on the other hand, he's going to have to prove that he can actually get things done in this very messy world of politics.
It's interesting, because there's a parallel here to what we saw with Trump in the U.S. He was also a political outsider, a businessman who promised to shake things up and drain the swamp.
Right.
But once he got into office, it was a lot harder to actually implement his agenda.
It was.
Do you think Carney will face similar challenges?
It's certainly a possibility. Governing is very different from campaigning.
Yeah.
You have to build consensus. You have to make compromises. You have to navigate this whole complex web of relationships and competing interests.
Right.
It's not enough to just have good ideas. You need to be able to execute them.
For sure.
And that requires a different set of skills than what Carney's developed in his career as a central banker.
So it's not just about whether he wins the election, it's about what he does if he actually becomes prime minister.
Exactly. The real test of his leadership will come after the election, when he has to deal with the day-to-day realities of governing. And that's something we'll be watching very closely in the coming months and years.
This deep dive has been incredibly helpful in understanding how complex the situation really is.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground, but I feel like there's one more piece of the puzzle we need to explore.
Okay.
Carney's vision for Canada on the world stage.
Right.
He's talked about standing up to Trump, but what does that actually look like in practice?
Yeah.
What kind of foreign policy will he pursue if he wins?
That's a great question. And it's one that's going to have a significant impact, not just on Canada, but potentially on the global balance of power as well.
Right.
We'll delve into that in the next segment.
Okay.
But first, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned so far about Mark Carney, the man who may very well become Canada's next prime minister.
Okay, so as we head into the final part of this deep dive, it feels like we're looking at a real turning point for Canada.
It is.
You've got this incredibly complex web of challenges, the trade war with the U.S., the economic problems at home, this election, that could go either way.
Right.
But in the middle of all of this, you have Mark Carney,
right,
this finance guy who's never held elected office before, and now he's suddenly like the center of it all.
I know. It's crazy.
It's almost like something out of a movie, right?
It really is. It's a dramatic story, and it raises some interesting questions about what kind of leadership is needed now in these, uncertain times.
Right. And we've talked a lot about the challenges Carney faces.
We have.
But there's another side to this, too.
That's true.
Those same challenges could actually help him succeed.
Yeah.
What do you mean? How could all this pressure actually work in his favor?
Well, think about it this way.
Okay.
Carney's stepping onto the stage at a moment when Canadians are looking for reassurance.
Right.
They want someone who can, project strength and competence when everything feels uncertain.
Sure.
They're worried about the future, their jobs, Canada's place in the world. And then here comes Carney, this very accomplished person with a global reputation.
Right.
He's not just a politician. He's like a symbol of stability and expertise.
So you're saying that him being an outsider, the fact that he's not a career politician, that could actually be a good thing right now.
Exactly. Voters are often drawn to candidates who seem authentic, who aren't seen as part of the problem.
Right.
And Carney can use that by presenting himself as a problem solver.
Okay.
Someone coming in with new ideas and a willingness to challenge the way things are done.
But we can't forget about the problems Canadians are dealing with at home.
Oh, for sure.
The crazy housing costs, the strain on healthcare.
Yeah.
Those things aren't just going to go away because there's a new prime minister.
Right.
Can Carney really fix those things while also dealing with the pressure from the trade war?
That's the real test of his leadership.
Yeah.
He can't only focus on the big global picture.
Right.
He has to show Canadians that he understands their everyday struggles and that he has a plan to make things better. He's already mentioned some possible solutions, like getting rid of the carbon tax and reversing that capital gains tax hike.
Yeah, but those policies are going to be controversial, right?
Probably some voters will like them, but others won't.
So how does he navigate that?
That's where his experience and his ability to communicate will be really important.
Okay.
He has to explain his policies in a way that's clear and that people can relate to.
Right.
He has to connect those policies to the vision he has for Canada's future.
I see.
He needs to show that he's not just, making decisions based on ideology or to get votes.
Sure.
But that he's actually trying to find solutions that will help all Canadians.
It sounds like he's walking a tightrope.
It is. He needs to be bold and decisive, but also practical and understanding.
Can he do it?
Well, it's a tough job.
Yeah.
But remember, this is someone who's been in these high-pressure situations before.
Right.
He's led central banks through financial crises and navigated the complexities of Brexit.
Right.
He knows how to make tough choices when things are uncertain. Yeah. The question is, can he use those same skills in politics?
So what you're saying is that while his lack of political experience could hurt him, it could also be an advantage if he uses it, right?
Yeah, exactly. He can show himself as a new voice.
Okay.
Someone who isn't tied to the old ways of doing things.
And that might appeal to voters who are tired of the same old political games?
Exactly. People who just want someone to actually get things done.
This whole situation is so fascinating.
It is.
Because it really shows how leadership is changing in the 21st century.
Right.
It's not just about being charismatic or being good at politics anymore.
Right.
It's about really understanding complex issues, communicating those issues clearly, and inspiring confidence when things are so uncertain.
And that's what makes this deep dive so interesting.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about one man or one election.
Right.
We're talking about Canada's future and its place in the world.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, we're left with some pretty big questions for you all to think about. Can Mark Carney, this financial expert with no political background, can he actually bring a nation together that's dealing with all these challenges?
Yeah.
Can he create a new role for Canada in the world?
Right.
Can he give people a vision for the future that makes them feel hopeful and confident when everyone is so anxious?
Yeah, big questions.
Only time will tell, but one thing is for sure.
That's that.
The world is going to be watching as this all plays out.
It will be.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Canadian politics.
It's been fun.
It's been a wild ride, and we can't wait to see what happens next. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.